Hello, my name is Justin Pinkney, and I'd like to take this opportunity to talk to you about something that we will all face in life, and that's grief. And I'm specifically talking about the grief associated with losing a loved one. And I want to use my journey as a testament to the fact that there is life after losing someone you love. And I want to give you some ways in which I have coped and am coping with the death of my mother. Let me give you a bit of my story. On November 25th, 2014, my mother fell into cardiac arrest, roughly 9 o'clock p.m. And I didn't know. I didn't find out until Wednesday, November 26th at 3 a.m. Washington Hospital Center gave me a call and said that my mother was found unresponsive outside of a vehicle. And in that moment, I didn't know exactly where it happened, if it happened outside of her house. I was thinking it did, because at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night, she should be home, but there were times where she worked late and didn't come home until 9 or 9:30 or sometimes later. But this particular evening, she was heading over to my grandfather's house, her father's house, and she was on her way in, and from witness accounts, she was out there screaming for help, saying that she could not breathe. And it was a senior living community, so most of the people there, I don't think anyone had a cell phone. The guy who was telling me the story said that he didn't know what was going on until a lady that was outside in the parking lot ran inside and said, "There's a lady outside screaming for help." And someone in the building called 911 from their landline. But November 26th, 3 a.m., the doctor from Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C. told me that it didn't look good. She was found unresponsive, and possibly she was without a heartbeat for 30 minutes, which means that there is a huge risk of severe brain damage and brain death. So once I received that news, I was in total shock. I didn't know how to react. I immediately called my aunt, my mother's sister, who lives in North Carolina, and I told her what was going on and the news that I had gotten. And she was shocked, and she prayed with me, and she said she would get up here as soon as she could. And I said, get up here safely. As I was preparing to drive myself to the hospital, I live in Maryland, about 20 minutes, 25 to 40 minutes from downtown DC. The hospital is on the other side of downtown DC, so it's about 40 minutes away, 45 minutes away. And before I left, I went into my best friend's room, and I told him I told him what happened and the news that I had gotten, and I said I was on my way up to the hospital. He said, I don't want you to drive. You don't look like you're doing well. And I wasn't hysterical, and at least I don't think I was. But I was definitely in shock. And we made our way up to the hospital. When we arrived, my uncle and his wife were there. My uncle's my mother's brother. And they didn't know where she was. The only thing they knew was she was there and that she was in central intake. And the floor that they were on was the floor that she was on, but we didn't know where she was. So I went into the nurses area to see if they could find her, and They they said that she was there, but they believed that she was being moved to a room, and that they would confirm that. So a few minutes had passed, and then one of the nurses said she was in a room and things were being prepared and they couldn't allow anyone back there. So we waited for a few hours before we were allowed to go to the room where she was. And when I first saw her, oh my goodness, I it was unreal. It was unbelievable to see my mother hooked up to tubes and you know a tube down her throat and you know any illnesses she had, she kept to herself. She was a strong woman of faith, and whenever she felt sick, she would just say, you know, I'm not feeling well, and I'm giving it over to God, and I'm praying about it, and you know, she really didn't like to answer questions about her health and the status of her health. And you know, she just felt like God would take care of it. And this came as a shock to all of us. You know, we weren't aware of anything so severe happening with her that could cause her heart to stop beating. Um, so a week goes by, and the doctors tell us there has been no improvement. The only functioning part of her brain is the brain stem. The rest of her brain is dead. And essentially, we would have to make a choice. Have her moved to a facility where she'll be taken care of, bathed and fed and things like that through a feeding tube, uh, perhaps having in-home care or having her placed in hospice, or removing the tubes and letting the focus be solely on her comfort. And the decision fell on me because I was her next of kin and her only child. So I sat down with my mother's siblings and extended family. We were all at the hospital. Not everyone was there, but the crux, the core of the family was there. And I said, what do you want to do? Because I didn't want to make the decision on my own. It was hard, definitely difficult to make the decision of life or death on behalf of your mother. Only 56 years old, still a lot of life to live, but we've got only a brain stem working. The brain is dead, and there's been no sign of improvement. And during that week, you know, we've witnessed her experience extremely violent body tremors. You know, she would shake violently, and the doctor said, you know, this is just her nervous system going through a process, or I don't know. I forget. You know, it's April 12th, and it's 4 months later, so I can't remember specifically what they were saying, but they were saying that these were involuntary neurological things happening. And then eventually she opened her eyes, and we were excited. You know, we thought, oh, she's out of the coma. And you know, I went to Facebook and I posted it on Facebook, and people were happy and celebrating. And the doctor said, no, it's a part of the involuntary body actions that can happen when someone is in a coma. She's not actually opening her eyes on purpose. So of course that ruined our party. Um, so once we were presented with the possibility of her not making it out of the situation and there being no improvements, after the meeting where we were given that news, I called the doctor back into the meeting area and said, and this is something that we all agreed to, and my family said, you know, whatever decision you choose to make, we support it wholeheartedly. And I said, well, I don't think my mother would want to be in that position. She's a very independent woman. She's a very strong-willed woman. And to say that she does not have the freedom to move her body, to do for herself, to do what she wants to do, to go and come as she pleases, to help people, because she was all about helping people and, not always focusing on herself, but making sure people around her were taken care of. She wouldn't want to be in this position. So I said, as hard as this is for me, I have to let her go. So I called the doctor back again and I said, we've decided as a family that we want you all to just focus on her comfort, remove the tubes, and just focus on her resting comfortably. So we were given the opportunity to say our goodbyes, and we cried and we hugged and we kissed my mother, and we all said our piece to her. And I remember specifically whispering in my mother's ear, I said, "Mom, if you're ready to go, I lovingly release you into your transition." So about 11 o'clock that night, I had returned home, and about 30 minutes later, I get a call from the hospital, and they tell me that she's now off of the tubes, she's now off of the machines, and she's resting comfortably. And this was a Wednesday. Thursday, I get a call that she's been moved to hospice. So I visit her in hospice, and she's breathing really hard. I mean, she's still in the coma. Her breathing it's like she just got finished running a marathon, and she was making those gargling noises, and I'm like, yeah, she's in her final stage. But in that moment, I had an overwhelming feeling of anger. I was angry at the fact that she didn't take care of her body, she didn't take her health seriously, and I was so busy focusing on that I didn't give myself an opportunity to be sad. And also, I was trying to get signatures on a letter that I could use to take to her job and send to her creditors to let them know that she's not in a position to handle her affairs. And it was difficult to get those signatures, but I eventually got them before I left that night. When I returned home, I knew that was the last time I would see my mother with breath in her body. I get a call Friday afternoon, 12:30 p.m., December 5th, telling me that my mother's passed away. My initial reaction wasn't that of sadness or grief, but it was relief. I was relieved at the fact that she was no longer suffering, that she was no longer fighting for her next breath. And I spread the news to my family. Those of us that sat with her in the hospital, we were all feeling a sense of relief. I believe the others were feeling that, because there was no immediate reaction of grief. The individuals who weren't there during that stint in the hospital, they were definitely sad, but those of us that were with her, we didn't really show immediate emotion. But for me, I was glad that she was no longer suffering and she was no longer in limbo. Planning a funeral is tough, but it still distracts you from being sad. Once everything was said and done, I started feeling the emotions of sadness and anger and regret, feeling like, if there was something that I could have done. There were things that happened leading up to her getting sick that gave me warnings of something getting ready to happen, but I didn't know how to really accept them or interpret them in the moment. Before she fell into cardiac arrest, 2 weeks before that, I saw her, and she didn't look well. She didn't look like herself. Her face was sunken in, her complexion was gray, And I told her, Mom, you don't look well. You remind me of, Myrtle Marshall. And Myrtle Marshall is my great grandmother who died of a stroke in 1986. I believe she was found unresponsive, and she was on breathing tubes, and the family had to make a decision. Similar situation. So it's interesting in hindsight that I would choose that as an analogy to describe how she looked to me. And when I said that, she just said, hmm. And 5 days before she fell into cardiac arrest, I was in a rehearsal. I'm a drummer, and I was rehearsing with a band, and this is the spookiest thing I've ever experienced. I've never experienced this before, but as I was playing drums, her face appeared before my eyes as if she walked into the room, and it quickly vanished. In between songs, I sent her a text message, "Are you okay? How are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, I'm fine." This was like 9 o'clock at night. "Oh, I'm fine. I just got off from work. Thanks for checking up on me. I appreciate your kindness." This was November 20th. And I know I'm jumping all over the place, but things are coming to me. This is raw and unscripted, so bear with me. But to fast forward to the feelings after the funeral and after the burial, now that you're alone with your feelings, everything happens, Could I have done something? If I would have listened to those or paid attention to those signs and really understood that they were preparing me for her death, or that they were telling me that something serious was getting ready to happen with her health. If I would have driven her to the hospital the day that I saw her and she wasn't looking well, could it have saved her life? First of all, I went through that for several weeks. But then I reminded myself of a truth that I discovered many years ago, is that we are in control of our thoughts. Our thoughts don't drive us. We have the power to drive our thoughts. Contrary to popular belief, we can direct the traffic of our mind. We can control the station that is playing on the radio that is our mind. So I immediately began telling myself that I can't change the past. I can't rewrite the past. And I began letting go of the idea that the past could have been any different. Things happened the way they should have happened. And I say that because had I had the insight, and I'm a very insightful person, if I had the insight to say, okay, she doesn't look well, I'm going to rush her to the hospital, I would have, knowing my mother, I would have been met with resistance, because she was a woman of faith. She didn't like dealing with a lot of doctors. She was all about praying through the pain and praying through the sickness. So she would have been more receptive to me stopping to pray with her versus driving her to the hospital. She would have resisted. And that was just the personality she had. I'm not judging. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that it just was what it was. So that would have, if the situation would have happened and she would have refused treatment, then it would have made the death even more painful and impactful. So I began letting go of the regret in that way. And then you deal with triggers of sadness, triggers of the feeling of loneliness and loss, because your loved one is no longer with you. And I'm giving you this story because I want to help you guys that are dealing with the grief. Let's say a trigger point is a song that the dearly departed liked, or their favorite meal, or fragrance, or a time of day that you spoke with the individual who's passed. Those things can trigger feelings of just despair and darkness, hopelessness. But going back to the principle of being able to control and direct our thoughts, I began to use those triggers to focus on happy moments associated with those triggers. Happy moments from the life of the dearly departed, of my mother. For instance, one day I was driving her car, and this was actually the first day I had driven her car since she had passed. And I turned the radio on, and a CD was playing that she and I had listened to. And it really made me sad to listen to that CD because I made the CD for her. I put a bunch of songs, a bunch of songs on one CD, and it was a mixed CD of some gospel songs, and it was really sad to listen to. But after going through my crying spell, I began to focus on how much she loved it, how much she loved the music, how much she would sing along with the music, and I began to smile, just reflecting on her singing. And that taught me that, and this is after, seeking counseling and learning how to process these feelings. Counseling is very helpful when you're dealing with loss. Don't be ashamed to go to counseling. You don't have to do this alone. There's help for you. Don't try to do this alone, because pulling yourself out of grief and despair is so tough. But once you get that counseling associated with dealing with loss and dealing with grief, um, you'll find yourself getting placed on a path where you can help yourself. At least that was my experience. So that moment taught me that I, in fact, can turn those sad moments into happy moments as I reflect on the life of my mother. So I'm talking around the time frame of February. As I began developing this habit, whenever I would feel sad and I'm missing my mother, I would do a mind check. What am I thinking about, and how can I change the station? So if I'm looking at, for instance, a DVD that she liked to watch, I would actually think about her laughter. Because she liked to watch funny shows and funny movies. She has a box set of Seinfeld. And I would think about how crazy her laugh was, and I would begin to laugh. And I would change my sadness into joy. So 4 months later, it's April 12th, 4 months later, um, I'm doing a lot better now. And I would encourage you guys to do that. Whenever you're feeling sad about the dearly departed, think about the happy moments associated with the triggers of your sadness. And you'll find yourself automatically doing it. It won't be an effort. It won't be something that you have to do on purpose. Once you train your mind to do this, you will create a thought pattern that will simply happen as a natural response to a trigger. Now, that's not to say here, 4 months later, April 12th, 2015, I'm still not having sad moments. Yes, I have sad moments, and I'm still working through them, but it gets easier when you put this into practice. Changing your thoughts when you have those triggers to focus on the happiness associated with those triggers. And you will find yourself moving forward with your life, not forgetting about your loved one, but holding on to them, and there being peace with their departure. You're now making peace with the new reality. See, what happens is when someone dies, your mind has to adjust to the new reality. And for me, I found myself being forgetful. Things that I would do at work in terms of like conference calls and meetings, I would lose my train of thought. I would forget what I was saying the moment before. And my counselor told me, this is your mind becoming adjusted to the new reality. Give it some time, you're gonna get back on track. And you're not going crazy. So if that's happening to you, you're not going crazy, you're not losing your mind. It's a natural adjustment process that your mind has to go through. I want to leave you with this. You have the power to control your thoughts. You can move forward. There is a life after the passing of a loved one. You can definitely get back into the swing of life while holding on to the love of the loved one that you've lost. Learn the lessons that they taught you in living their life. Learn from the consequences of their actions. Learn from the good things that came out of their actions, the bad things that came out of their actions or inactions or reactions. Learn from their personalities. What worked, what didn't work. And you'll find yourself understanding that your loved ones living wasn't in vain, and they continue to live on in you and in your life. Peace and blessings.